Welcome to the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Miley, an IFS-informed certified trauma recovery coach. This show features interviews from survivors all over the world as they share their impactful story of thriving in their post-traumatic growth. We explore resources, tools, and coping skills to support the trauma survivor community. Enjoy. Welcome back to the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. I am your host, Sarah Miley, an IFS-informed trauma recovery coach. I have with us today Dan Henk. So Dan's early art career included a 1.5-year stint drawing political cartoons for Madcap magazine and illustrating underground projects. In 1997, though, after he struggled through a violent car crash and a knife fight with a crackhead that severed the tendon in his left thumb, he attended art school. Receiving some commercial and local gallery acclaim for his artwork, he moved to New York City in an attempt to kickstart his art career. Heavily immersing himself in the local hardcore scene, he produced artwork for several bands. In 2000, he started tattooing, initially working on many of his musician friends. A year later, in September 2001, he was stricken with brain cancer and underwent surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. 3 months after his surgery, he married a fellow tattoo artist, Monica Castillo. He started working growing number of tattoo magazines, tattoo-related books such as No Regrets and Tattoo Prodigies. Tragedy struck him again, though. In 2007, his wife of 6 years was killed on a motorcycle by a hit-and-run driver. Despite extensive coverage in the local media and the community, the culprit was never found. He moved to Austin for a few years and started doing a regular comic strip entitled Rollo and Me for a Tattoo Artist magazine and many other illustrations. His first novel, The Black Seas of Infinity, was published in 2011, and he started to work on an illustrated calendar featuring a variety of artists. He continues to work for independent magazines, doing art for the Red Door magazine and a slew of other ones. He currently is writing his short stories. The latest, Wish Fort Bragg, is available on Amazon, as well as his anthology of short stories that debuted in the summer called The Never Dead. Dan, thank you so much for being here. I know this is just a different kind of podcast. We're diving kind of into this idea of creativity and art and resiliency, and you've obviously been through so much. What was your journey like? All of this tragedy and triumph that you've had kind of mixed in success, but also all this grief and pain at the same time. How's that been for you?
Yeah, first I just want to say thank you. And it sounds like a big deal, like you're talking about all the shit I've done. I don't know if I can curse on this podcast,
Sure, yeah.
but yeah, it's I'm sorry, what was the preliminary question?
Yeah, just tell us a little bit more about that journey of all the stuff that you've been through while you've been kind of working your way into the success that you've had as well.
Well, I think like my parents are German and Norwegian, so they kind of have that like very stiff, like like not really an emotional, social connection, whatever. And so it's kind of, and they also were kind of like helicopter parents, like my dad's army, so he lived like on army bases, and built like tree forts and BMX biked everywhere. So it's just like you kind of get used to like being your own thing, and then everything was cool, but my parents are like super conservative and super religious. So, when I hit like about 12, and first I got into like metal, like glam metal, like Def Leppard, like Quiet Riot and stuff like that. And then I got into punk rock, and that for them was the worst.
Yeah, they
So
didn't like that
now
so
I thought I was inspired by Satan and all this stuff. But the thing is, like, you get so used to being yourself that
much.
you're like, whatever you think, it doesn't really matter because this is what I wanted to do. So I think this kind of like kept me alive and kept me going in life, ever since like I was like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do. Okay, I'm getting negative like feedback over here. I'm like, I don't care. You know, and like I said, that kind of like a rebellious punk rocker attitude just kind of like transferred through to everything. Like I remember like I got really high grades in high school. Like I had photographic memory. So, we used to have a TV until my grandma fell sorry for us and gave us her old TV. So in seventh grade we finally got a TV. But until then, I'd be at isolated military bases and I just go to the library and I check out like a whole stack of books and I'd have them read within a week. So like I was reading full novels by fourth grade level, like full adult novels and stuff. So I always read a lot, and then we didn't have like video games, like we didn't have TV, so I didn't really see movies. So it was just like I always had my own like fantasy world and my own stuff I was doing. I was drawing, I was reading, I was writing. Like I wrote my first novel in fifth grade. It's horrible, I was just picking up, but you know I was getting negative feedback, it's like, well, I'm doing my own thing. I don't care what you think.
Wow.
And like I remember, like I had moved every 3 years because my parents are military. So we moved from Florida, where they put me in an advanced program because I scored really high. But they had this idea that they would test you, and then if you scored really high, they put you in the worst school to try and bring it up. So like we had a police station in the school. Like there was an armed cop in the school. I remember some guy got knifed. Like all his guts were hanging out the first day. And my parents were kind of freaking out, but like, as long as you weren't into like drugs or gangs, like nothing really touched you. But then when we moved to Virginia, they made me test just for placement,
Yeah.
and so I took the SATs. Like they told me, like don't study for it; it's just for placement. But they said that I got high enough to get into Harvard off the SATs.
Wow.
So because I was trying to retake it, they're like, you don't need to. So my point of all this is not talking myself up. My point of all this is like I had high SATs and I had a really high GPA, but I looked super punk rock, like mohawk, like spiky leather jacket. And I
Yeah.
remember I went to my guidance counselor because I was trying to go to art school. And
Mhm.
like no, like my parents were like art's not a career, and so I'm like, how do I get like a grant, or I get somebody to like co-sign a loan or something? And she said, get ready for a career of public gas because that's all you're ever gonna do.
Wow.
But I think like if I have any key takeaway from that, it's like don't listen to people, because like now I own a tattoo shop. I have 4 published novels. I've done work for comic books, for books, for magazines. It's like you can't listen to people. People give me Karens.
Wow. It sounds like that was so young for you, even with your parents, like being conservative, and you were like, I'm just going to do my own thing. And I love the way you kind of like relied on this imaginative part of you, right? And like writing and all of this reading and just digesting all this information. When did it really turn from like reading and writing? Because that's very different than like creative art and tattooing and drawing. When did that kind of shift, or were they just always both there for you?
Well, I always drew it. Like I took oil painting classes in third grade. Like my parents sent me to like some local lady who was like an artist, and she do like a Saturday morning art classes. And again, those are horrible. Don't look into those. But like I paint dinosaurs and stuff. But the thing is, like, so I was always the kind of guy who drew. That
Yeah.
was just my thing. And like I played like role playing games as a little kid. Like think like Stranger Things, like how they all make their own little world. So,
Yeah.
but I do that, but like I draw all the little characters and everything. And then when I got into punk rock, like I had a lot of friends that were like in bands, but I was the guy who drew. So I was the guy who do all the artwork, and I paint the back of the jackets and stuff like that. So art's kind of always been a thing with me. I wanted to be a writer because I love telling my own stories. Like when I was a little kid, I could just make up my own fantasy world. Like we lived in Fort Bragg, and a lot of like the woods around that they used as training grounds for World War II.
Yeah.
So there are all these remnants of foxholes and like old buildings and stuff like that. So me and my friends would just go in the woods and we'd play, soldier, and we'd have like we'd fire bottle rockets out of hairspray, bottles at each other, and pretend like we're fighting. Like we lived in this imaginative world, like hiding in foxholes and whatever. So like I read a lot too. So it's like, I had a lot to like feed off of. And
Mhm.
at some point I like if I felt like, how am I going to come up with my own stuff? It's like, I'm just getting all this feedback, but I don't feel like it's me. I feel like it's a bunch of other people's. And at some point it just kind of transitioned. And I
Into
felt like,
emotion.
yeah, I felt like, now it's my own thing. Now I'm doing my own thing.
Wow, way to own it. I mean, I think a lot of kids would be struck by like shame or fear, especially with all the negative feedback coming from your own parents. And like, God forbid, your guidance counselor. I hear so many stories of that, of just guidance counselors that didn't see potential in kids, that just, kind of gave them the boot and told them you're just never going to amount to anything. And you're just like, no, I'm just going to kind of do my own thing, which I think is really now you're an adult, and as you're growing up you start to go through a lot of stuff, and especially as an artist and your hands being so important, then you're in, a car crash and you're in this knife fight and you have this injury to your hand. And when that's all going through, did you ever think that there was going to be a time where maybe you couldn't do the art that you loved anymore?
Like the way I look at stuff, I try to, like, my girlfriend calls it that glass half full perspective, because everything I do, like, I always try and look for like some positive side of it, something coming out of it. So like, like whenever anything happens, like I'm just gonna get through this and I'm not gonna let it stop me. Like when I had brain cancer, like a lot of people would like let that, they're like, okay, well now I'm defeated. I was like, this is not gonna be the end of me. I'm gonna keep going. So it's like whatever I gotta do to keep going. So like even when I the knife, I mean, fortunately it was my left hand, it wasn't my right hand, but I never for a moment thought, hey, maybe I'm gonna stop drawing. I'm sure if at some point I lost my arm, I'd be like, fuck. But
Yeah.
then I'd be like, I gotta learn to draw with my left hand.
Yeah.
That's the way I think.
That does sound like exactly what you would do if you lost your entire right arm. You'd be like, well, I guess I'm a left-handed artist now.
Yeah.
That's really amazing. We talked about this before we started recording about the fact that you were diagnosed with brain cancer and that was 2001 and you were in New York City and so here comes this national tragedy and you said you were watching that from a hospital room. So in all of this, like, did you ever find that space of like tapping in? Because you said you kind of grew up with these parents who were really kind of emotionally distant. Did you really start tapping into like your emotions and recognizing, grief and recognizing, struggle, even though you're turning it into triumph? Did there have to come a point where your emotions had to kind of work their way through you, or did you find that you were kind of pushing them down?
I don't think like I'm not like a super emotional person. My girlfriend gives me shit about this all the time, but I'm not a super emotional person. So I remember I was getting headaches and I went to the hospital and like, like it got so bad right before I went to the hospital that like I couldn't even walk straight. I was like trying to walk straight and I was like veering off to the side. And my girl had to keep redirecting me. So we get in there and I felt like I had a jackhammer to the back of my head. I felt horrible. Like the ultimate, thing that morning they kind of like kickstarted. I had to go to the hospital. Like I went to the second clinic. They're like, call us the next morning, feel worse. That morning, I was like puking. My head was like leaning over the sink in the bathroom. I felt like pretty gun to my head and ending it. I felt so bad. And, when they finally came to the clinic, because my girl kept calling nonstop. And when they finally came in, they're like, yeah, go to the hospital. So
Yeah.
I'm going to the hospital and said I'm walking sideways. So they take me in, they put me in the CAT scan. They're like, what do you do? I said, Muay Thai. They said, probably brain bleed. Like they do the CAT scan, they go, oh, wait, it's cancer.
Oh,
And then, but they gave me medication, so it instantly got rid of the headache. And they're like, we got to operate right away. Like you probably had about 2 weeks before you died. Because it's a slow growing tumor. And so the inside was all necrotic tissue. And once it broke out, then, it hit your brain, you'd be dead. And I remember I was crying. She's like, you don't care. I'm like, well, of course I care, but what am I going to do? And that's kind of the way I think. That's where I was leading. That's the way I think of stuff. I'm like, you know, what I'm going to try my best to get through this. That's all I can do. I'm not going to go, oh, well, what if this or, oh, why feel sorry for yourself? It's not going to lead to anything.
yeah, yeah, I'm sure that has taken you very, very far. I can definitely appreciate that because you're right. Like we can only control what we can control, but when you're in it, yeah, I mean the pain is so bad, and there's the fear there, and you don't want to die. But I love the way that you kind of declared that this isn't going to be the thing that takes me out. Couple of months later after that, you marry Monica, your girlfriend at the time, and then a few years later, she's killed in this terrible tragedy, this hit and run. I imagine, I'm going to guess, I haven't read this part of your story, but was it you that was kind of behind getting the coverage and getting the community action involved to try to find the person who hit and run her? Was that
Oh,
how did that?
definitely.
Yeah.
So let me give you a little backstory. So she was a Colombian immigrant. She like spoke English like probably about 80%, and I started dating her. She worked at a tattoo shop that I worked at. So I started dating her. We were dating for like 3 months and then came down with brain cancer. And brain cancer is kind of weird because like it's such a serious event that like I had this whole that I go to like shows with and all that stuff. They all just dropped out. They all disappeared. They didn't say like, "Oh, screw you, I'm not gonna talk to you." They just, you know, they're all of a sudden they wouldn't respond, whatever. But I every day in the hospital, she visited me. And she always looked sad. And she always looked like, "Hey, how are you feeling?" I was like, "This is a good person."
Mhm.
So then I got married to her because I'm like, I found the one. Like, she's really a good person.
Mhm.
Is the first person that I ever dated that I felt like that about. And we were for 6 years before she died in the hit and run.
Wow.
So and like it's weird because like I went through brain cancer. We moved all over the country. I owned two shops. Like at the time, I didn't know better. So as a younger artist, I started with a partner, and often the partner didn't work out. So, but we've been all over the place
Mhm.
through a whole bunch of shit.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. And then tragedy happens. What was that like for you?
Well, it was first of all, I mean, it was shocking, but it's like I remember I got woke in the morning by the NYPD calling me, and they call me and they're like, "Yeah, are you married to Monica Hank? Do you know Monica Hank?" I'm like, "What happened?" Like I'm immediately wide awake. They're like, and you could tell they could care less. They're like, "Oh, she ran a stop sign or something." Uh, I'm like, what? So uh, she was like, I got that she was involved in a traffic accident. I'm like, all right, what hospital is she at? I'm like, what? Like, who's in charge of the investigation? Like, what's the investigation number? Who's in charge? And the guy's like, well, he tells me the hospital, like, but he told me like basic details there. And then he's like, it was the closest hospital to where she was. And then he was like, well, I can tell you my name. Like, there wasn't even an investigation squad. And then I remember with the hospital, it was in the Marcy Projects, which is
Mhm.
where Jay-Z's from.
Mhm. In
And
Brooklyn,
I,
yeah.
I had there's a good friend of mine named Rachel Rosen. She was the bassist in the band Indecision,
Yeah.
and but she was working for the medical examiner's office. And when I started tattooing, I was tattooing her. But so we stayed in touch. So I
Mhm.
immediately called her to say, hey, what should I do? And they said, she's like, get her out of that hospital.
Oh,
You
God.
know, so and the thing is like the she was hit, she flew off her bike, landed on her head, and it broke her neck.
Yeah.
So when they took her into the emergency room, it'd been over a half hour. So if you don't have blood to the brain for over a half hour, you're brain dead. But they didn't tell the hospital because they're so incompetent at the hospital. So they had her on machines. And I'm thinking like, oh, like if there's a little bit of rise and something, I'm like, oh, she's gonna make it, she's gonna be fine. There was no hope. But like, so I asked Rachel, like, have them moved to another hospital. I asked them, and they say, yeah, well, she's too unstable for a CAT scan, and we can't move her without a CAT scan. So then I call Rachel. I tell her Rachel's like, oh, well, they make a portable one. They can bring the CAT scan up to her.
Yeah.
So I tell the doctor's like, oh, make one? Who makes that? Like the doctors don't even fucking know. But like, so like the hospital's incompetent. I remember like the whole first day I stayed, I went downstairs to get coffee. I go back upstairs, and the security lady is like, you can't go. I'm like, what are you talking about? She goes, well, it's not visiting hours. I go, my wife is dying upstairs. And she goes, so? But
Wow.
I knew if I flipped down her, I'd get kicked out of the hospital. So, like, biting my lip, I go to the lady at the reception desk and I'm like, can you call up to the doctor and
Mhm.
have him call down? So she calls up the doctor. She's like, well, of course he can come. So the lady calls her. She's like, yeah, doctor says he can go up. And the lady goes, no, tell him he has to call me personally.
Oh my word.
So I turned back to the reception lady, like really gritting my teeth. I'm like, can you call the doctor again? And she's like, no, why should I?
Wow.
So I had to go to a payphone, call the doctor, and then, but so my point is that they're treating me so badly. I was like, you know, I got to do something about this.
Yeah.
So I like I made like flyers and had friends post them everywhere. They were all over Brooklyn, and I went on News One and News Five, and she's Colombian, so her brother, my brother-in-law, went on Univision and Telemundo, and we had an attorney like almost right away. What should we do? And he said, "Okay, picture as a model." Because nobody cares if it's like, a tattoo artist, Colombian immigrant, nobody cares. But she did a little bit of alternative modeling. I mean, she was a very pretty girl, so it's like if we picture her as a model, everyone's going to care. It's true because the moment we pictured the model, all of a sudden it was everywhere. The press also was apologizing to me. NYPD started an investigation. So all this stuff happened, and I was a big name of the tattoo industry. So it was in all the tattoo magazines, and this was on a motorcycle, so it was in all the motorcycle magazines. So lots of people like were pouring in for support. Everybody was trying to help, but it took 5 days for that all to get started. And with the hit and run, 5 days later, you're not going to find the person. To this day, they haven't found that person.
Wow. Wow. That's what I meant when I said I have a feeling, just from the little I know about you, that you probably had a lot to do with that, because your mindset is we got to do something, like
Right.
something you have to kind of find a way to kind of move forward. And like even in that face of that tragedy, you recognize that you were going to still be that hope and that inspiration to her as she's laying in a hospital, and there's just not much that you can for her, and she's already basically gone. They had her on the machines, like you said, but probably already gone. And that's like a great outlet for grief. I mean, we see this a lot with, the Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Like that happened coming out of the grief of their children being killed by drunk drivers. Like that is such an important thing to kind of have a goal and have, something that continues to inspire you, even though you're going through so much tragedy. And that just seems like that's kind of been your mindset, like through most of it, even way back into your childhood, just going, I'm just going forward. And I think that's a really kind of life skill to have, and you've been through so much, and what a tragedy. And I'm so sorry that not been able to bring this guy to justice, whoever it was that hit her, because even if they had stopped and helped her, maybe it could have saved her life had they gotten her help sooner. So it's just sad that, other
Well,
people
it,
don't
it
take
was
that
in Red
responsibility.
Hook. So, like, apparently the person hit her and just took off. So, by the time paramedics came to the scene and they got out of the hospital, it probably would have been too late. I don't know that they could have done anything.
Wow. Ugh, awful. Just so terrible. I know that I have heard from many people, and this has happened even friends that I've lost of cancer. People love going and finding some way to memorialize their loved ones after tragedy or loss of like an infant or child with tattooing. Do you see that quite a bit in your shop of people coming in to use art and tattoo as a way to kind of get through their grief?
Well, there are two takes on this. So I agree with one, I disagree with one. So what I agree with is like when people want to memorialize stuff, and like I'll tell you two examples. Like there's a guy whose dog died of cancer, and then he wanted a picture of that dog. He loved it. I mean, I understand. I have a dog. My dog is like my kid.
Yeah.
And people are like, you can compare animals to kids. I'm like, I just did. But so anyway, so I tattooed his dog on him, and I was happy to like I like doing realistic stuff, so that was right up my alley. So his way of dealing with grief is now he has a permanent picture of his dog on his arm, and I mean, fortunately, him and a whole bunch of his friends are like that looks exactly like the dog. So he's really happy with it. Like he's come back to me for other tattoos since then, but that was the one that made him delve into tattooing to begin with.
Wow.
Um, and so when people, and there's another example. There's a guy whose brother died, and he went to his local artist to get a portrait of his brother on him, and the local artist fucked it up. It's horrible. Like he doesn't even talk to the guy anymore. And so he came to me. I was like, all right, bring me a photo and let me see the original. So fortunately, it kind of depends on the original, but fortunately, I was able to make it look exactly like the photo.
Wow.
And he was, not only did like give him some resolution, but his mom loved that photo. So she's like, she wanted to get something in memory of him. So like apparently he played guitar, so she wanted a guitar pick with his signature on it. I usually do bigger, more extensive tattoos, but I'm not gonna tell her no. You
Yeah.
know, so I did that on her. So yeah, like if you get something in memorial of something that like having that on me like makes me feel a certain way, that's great. Some people are like, oh well, I have all this stress built up, so maybe the pain or whatever. Well, I don't agree with that. Like people are
Mhm.
like, oh yeah, well you're all wound up and maybe get tattooed. Well, like take your energy level down. Yeah, I don't agree with that. That I think that's bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. Because then it's kind of more of a coping skill rather than, actually trying to move forward and to heal. So yeah, that's actually a really good point. I hadn't even thought about the pain aspect because I mean that, people will turn to that. I mean, we have a lot of trauma survivors who struggle, with self-harm and cutting, and they end up kind of in that like addiction to pain, or like they're looking for something to feel real is kind of the brain science behind of it. I hadn't even thought of that about
Yeah,
tattoo.
I think that's kind of the same vein, that line of thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, wow, that's really, really. Dan, you've been through so much. Thank you so much for sharing your story and sharing your time. We always ask all of our guests, when you were healing through all of these things. I mean, obviously we know, art and kind of this escapism into books and writing has been super helpful. Were there other tools or resources that were helpful while you were going through, this healing process for yourself?
I think you gotta be yourself, and the more you're yourself, the better it is. When I was going through chemotherapy and I felt really weak, like I would bicycle every day to the hospital center, and they'd be like, "Did you bike here?" I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "You can't give up," and like I'd work out 3 days a week. So I lived in Williamsburg. I'd be biking over the bridge. I'd stop. I'd throw up over the bridge. Then I'd go to Crunch Fitness and I'd be working out, and maybe in the middle of a workout, I have to go and throw up, and I keep it up. But I'm like, you can't give up.
Mhm.
And after my wife died, I was like, I got to get my book out. I mean, life is short. I could die tomorrow. I got to get my first book out. And I think that kind of like, I still miss my wife. It's not like it all went away, but it's like that helps you go, yeah, I'm not going to let this be the end of me.
Yeah. Yeah. I really, really appreciate that. You have that book out since then. You've had multiple other books back. We were talking before we started recording that you've got the rights back to that. You've kind of, refreshed these books. So you've got multiple publications and a lot of info. Where can people find you? Where they can find the books? I'm going to have everything linked up in the show notes. I know you have your own podcast, you got your YouTube channel. You're really active on Instagram. So tell people where they can find you if they want more information.
Well, probably the best is my website, danhenk.com.
Yeah.
That's where I have all my links to everything. But I have an author page on Amazon, so you can see my books on Amazon. Um, I have like three of my own, and I have collections of stories and stuff. So I have lots of stuff up there. But my website is the best to see my blog, see my podcast, see everything.
Awesome. Awesome. Dan, thank you so much. We really appreciate having you on and sharing and being so vulnerable and diving into your story today. Thank you so very much. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for me.
Bye bye. Thank you for listening to or watching this episode of the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. Please subscribe, like, share, and follow. For any information that was discussed in this podcast episode, check out the show notes below. Until next time, be well.